part. Why? And then you can ask things like, why would anyone play it? And then you can maybe ask about how will they find about it. And in most cases, according to my experience, that's pretty much the whole creative box. It's about those three things. It's about why am I making this game? Why would anyone play it? How will they find about it? And in a way, you could think of that as that being your product vision. So it's kind of, in my head, it's split to two parts. You have your mission, so the reason you're making that game, and then you have the constraints that are to do with things that are preventing you from reaching that mission or reaching that goal. So constraints are things. This is going to be, by the way, repeating in many of the slides going forward. So constraints are things that prevent you from being successful with your mission. In practice, they can be things like the users. If you ask from UX designers, they're always starting from the point that the user is the main constraint. It's also one of the kind of best philosophical approaches for game design in general. You're always starting from the user, what the user needs. You can think about it from in a bigger picture of why are the users playing your game, but you can also think of them screen by screen. What does the user need to know in each of these screens? What are the features that the user needs to access in each of these screens? User is always in the center. And user is always often also the constraint. And sometimes the biggest constraint regarding the users is that they just don't like your game. That's hard constraint to deal with. But you can always kind of also break down some of these constraints to a little bit more details. Maybe the thing that you were thinking as a user constraints, maybe it's about the expectations, maybe it's about the skills, maybe it's about the budget. So maybe the expectations of the users were just misaligned with what you were delivering to them. Maybe your budget was not enough to deliver what they were expecting, or maybe in your team you don't have the skills to deliver what the users are expecting. In reality, constraints can be also, for example, any of these. There can be a lot of constraints, but you don't have to care about every single constraint between you and the goal, because some of them are more important than others. And some pretty much define the fate of your whole project. Like I said, I come from free-to-play game side. I've been looking at the market shifting and changing over time. And this is by far the biggest thing on the free-to-play game side. The biggest constraint that all of us are battling on the mobile front, but also probably on the indie game, Steam. It's the same thing. Everybody is looking at discoverability. So often, if you think about what is the constraint that is most defining your ability to reach your target, reach your goal, to get to your mission successfully, usually it's only one or two things. For mobile games, I would say that 90% of the time it's discoverability. People just don't find out about your game no matter what you do, unless you have huge user acquisition budgets. So that's why all the decisions you make should be aimed at targeting and solving that main constraint some way or another. You shouldn't be starting from like, hey, let's make a great game and everybody will find out about it because it's so great. There should be something about your game that is dealing with your main constraints. So, for example, if discoverability is important for your success, make art and creative decisions that help you in the user acquisition and marketability. And they can be things like memorability, relatability, supporting the value proposition, or, for example, strategic flexibility. Or you can, of course, just make a game that is so good looking that people remember and talk about it a lot. And believe me, it's easier said than done. You can make the most beautiful game, put it in the App Store, and nobody will find about it unless you do some marketing, that is. The good thing, maybe you could call it a good thing, is that most of those constraints are shared. So everybody who's doing free-to-play games in 2020 and beyond, they are dealing with the same discoverability problems, and different companies are dealing with them differently. And when you realize that something that is constraining you is a shared constraint, that's also a sign that it can be turned into a competitive edge. That's the good thing. So understand your mission and constraints and build your decisions to support in achieving your goals. That is the important part. So this is how I think about any decision making. So this is based on theory of constraints by Eliyahu Goldratt, business guru, thinker. This is my version of his theory of constraints. So this is how I think of every decision. You identify your goal or think of your mission. What are you trying to achieve? You research and understand that constraint, the things that are constraining you. To understand the constraints, you understand what is between you and the goal. You identify the most important constraint, and you make decisions based on dealing with that constraint. And then you go back to avoid inertia. So first, you need to understand the goal, like stated before, and we could maybe, to make it more concrete, we could look at it from the point of view of brand extensions to an existing IP. On the game level, you have to first understand, even when you're making like a new Angry Birds game, you have to first understand why are you making that game. What is the business reason or what is the brand strategy reason that you are making a new extension to the brand? And there can be a lot of things that could be that reason. You could have a reason that you want to expand the IP's reach to new markets, to new demographics, and so on and so on. Or you want to serve a new experience to existing fans. It changes the ball game. Or you want to improve the brand affinity. You want people to love your brand again. Or it can be something totally different. When I look at usually the reasons why we're making a game, it's often a combination of financial needs, brand needs, and customer needs. And ultimately, the goal of every company is to turn profit now and in the future. So somewhere hidden in all those fancy reasons you're giving to your teams and yourself about why are you making that game, ultimately there's somewhere hidden this financial reason. Often you're making a game to turn profits either with that game or you're trying to achieve skill levels that you could be employed to a bigger game company and get a job in the industry. But ultimately, there's a financial reason behind everything. So this is one distinction that I want to make, and sorry if this doesn't flow so nicely from the previous slides, and sorry if this is a little bit complicated. This is part that I copy pasted into this presentation from another another presentation. Then I thought that this could be interesting for you. Is understanding the difference between goal and necessary condition. So if we think about it from the point of view of profit-making company, a company that aims to make profit, for-profit company. All for-profit companies are in the business to secure the present and the future of the company. And that's the ultimate goal of the company. Then there is necessary conditions that can be sometimes mistaken for a goal. So you might have, for example, customer satisfaction. It's a necessary condition, but it's not the goal. It can be one of the main important things. In order for you to secure your present and the future, you need to make customers happy. In order to make products that the customers can be happy, you have to make your employees satisfied. They need to be satisfied now and in the future. And depending on your company structure, you have things like, for example, investor satisfaction. So in case of Rovio, we have to keep our owner Sega happy. If you are a startup, you have investors who have invested money to your success, so you have to keep the investors happy. All of these are very different depending on what kind of a company you are working in. And also they are very different if you are making just a game for yourself. If you're not a for-profit company, then you have totally different goals and you should be thinking about totally different things. But for profit, these are the things that matter. Investor satisfaction, that can be anything of these. You have customer satisfaction now and in the future, and so on and so on. So now you know like where to start. You need to start from the vision. You have to think about why are you making the game? How do you get there? And now we maybe finally get to talk about a little bit of more art topics. So let's talk about a little bit about setting the visual target. Finally, I think the artists are now waking up from the sleep that the previous section gave them. Let's talk about making art decisions. The first thing that I want to mention is that making the art decisions, it's about making multiple decisions, not just one. It's never just one. Art style just can't be decided with one decision. There's no scenario in world where you could be just making one decision and that's it. Unless you make a decision that, hey, let's make exactly like that competitor game. That's probably the only exception to this rule. Then you can make like decision that you copy every single aspect of that game. But in any other occasion, art style just can't be decided with one decision. So it's not a decision on art style, it's the decisions on art style. And when you're making those decisions, it's so important that you don't forget your mission. what is the goal that you're leading? And always, when every decision you make about the art decision or design, to that matter, it always should be somehow reflecting towards the overall mission that you're trying to achieve. Every decision can either help or harm your ability to reach your goal. Um, I was thinking that I could maybe talk a little bit about the Angry Birds movie because it's very close to my heart. I joined Rovio around the time when the Angry Birds movie uh, was just about started the production, and it was also a big part of the reason why I joined Rovio 10 years ago. And it was a kind of a wild bet, if you think about it. It feels like nowadays, if you look at it and you're thinking like, yeah, it's always been like that. But if you think about it a little bit more and you're kind of paying attention to kind of the kind of big things, it was kind of a wild thing. You had a IP that had only ball shaped or triangular shaped, like very simplified characters, and then for the movie reasons, you gave them hands and legs so that they could be more expressive. That's interesting on its own, and it's a very cool story. But there's also like other really cool story about Angry Birds, the movie, and the products that were made together with that movie. And they relate more to the branding aspect, and they kind of highlight some things also that have stuck to me about how can you think about IP and brand development. Um, this was seriously, this was one of the main questions that was being asked during the making of the movie and making of the games that were launching during the movie. We were all the time asking, can we put more feathers there? So, and this is about the kind of little branding you put on every single object of your game. We wanted to make sure that if you take a tree out of that universe, it would still feel that it belongs to that universe. We wanted to make sure that every single rock feels like it's part of that universe. The same thing goes to the big island. Pigs that they put symbols on all of their, they put the snouts on everything they build. Uh, you can see them in the scepter or the microphone. You can see them here down below the King Leonard on the truck. You can see them in those sand toys. They put snouts on everything they build. And this is one of the things that I always tell to people who are thinking of making a game or starting to think about art direction of a game. Try to think of what are the symbols that could be in your game. It's my number one tip for anybody thinking of branding or making a game and the wanting to have something very memorable. Symbol is almost like storytelling on its own. It's making sure that every single asset in your game is telling story, and it's easy to recognize that they are part of that game. Simple is easier to remember. So often when I'm thinking about art directing, I'm also thinking of branding. For me, they're almost like they're synonyms. I try to think of things like symbols, groups, legendary locations. All of those are doing the same thing. They are trying to make it easier to remember. Um, I try to think of also like juxtapositions or contrasts to make it easier to remember. There are things like you have a big, strong character with a teddy bear, and it's easily remember. You can easily remember that. They might be little girl that is extremely powerful and the best fighter in the universe. That's again making it easier to remember. That we easily remember the juxtapositions and contrasts. Also, when you're thinking of branding, I think it's good to remember that don't try to think that you're trying to invent something, because you're not. You're trying to repurpose something in their minds that exists in their understanding already, and you try to make that thing about your IP in their minds. So my tip number 4, I skipped the 2 and 3. Tip number 4 is contrasts. Try to think of things that are funny and interesting and memorable. Try to think of things like groups. How are things in your game universe grouped to different kind of sets? There's good guys, bad guys, there's fractions, there's gangs. It makes it easier to understand. It's hard for people to understand, remember individual characters, but it's easier for people to remember if there's groupings. And then the groupings also make it easier for them to understand or remember the individuals. Think of legendary locations. Every game should have a legendary location. Every brand should have a legendary location. In case of Angry Birds, it's probably the Eagle Mountain. In case of He-Man, it's the Skeletor's Castle or whatnot. In every good IP has a legendary location. And just as a reminder, creating a brand is not inventing something new, but it's repurposing something and making it all about your IP in the minds of your fans. And that's how I think about every game. I think of every game as a start of a franchise. So that's why I'm talking so much about branding. Let's skip the next video just quickly. With every game, you can also think about it like, what is your secret sauce? This is especially important when you're thinking about new expansion to an already existing IP. You shouldn't ever repeat the same story over and over again. You should really think of what is the unique story that you want to tell. Let's skip this. But art direction is also so much more than just branding. Sorry to waste so much of time on just talking about branding, but branding is so important for me in my everyday work. Brand is just one part of the puzzle. In reality, there is lots and lots of other things. You have, for example, characters and worlds and environments. In a different way, if you think about, all of those are part of the brand, but often brand is thought about as a separate thing of its own. For practical reasons, they are now here as separate things. And then within all of those, you have things like shape, language, palette, color usage, textures, techniques, proportions, rendering style, lighting style, line style, animation style. Like said, art style is not just one decision. It's lots and lots of decisions. And every one of those decisions can be further break down to more and more details. So you can, for example, think about the shape language. You might have under the shape language, you might have things like overall shape language. You can have a separate shape language for the characters to different kind of messaging purposes. You might have shape language for the environments. You might have shape language separately for the user interfaces. And all of these can amplify the storytelling or help with the overall mission. If we think about the shape language, every detail matters. Like if you have a shape language that is very rounded, round shapes are usually casual, non-threatening, approachable. They indicate fun and bouncy. You have rectangular shapes, they're more neutral, sturdy, strong, solid, inflexible, and so on. And when you have very these spiky things like triangles, they feel immediately more aggressive. There's speed, there's danger, simple things. And that's why there is a reason why almost every single casual game, especially casual puzzle game, that is something that I've done a lot, they're all full of round shapes. So even the shape language is trying to help with the mission. We are making a casual game for casual audience. We want to make something that is very rounded, feels safe, is satisfying, is not threatening. So it's not arbitrary decision why, or it's not just coincidence that all the shapes, for example, in this Angry Birds Journey screenshot, are rounded. Even the rectangulars are rounded. Even the triangles are rounded because we want to make it as casual, as inviting, as friendly as possible. And like I said, you can't solve all of those with one decision. It's tens or hundreds of decisions. And to make it easy, there's only one way to do it, and it's one decision at a time. Your art style is a combination of those smaller decisions you make. And to make it a little bit even harder, it's not only about you, it's also your team. The majority of the work for me as an art director is working with people. That's why I also tell the story about my team in the start of many of my presentations, because without my team, I wouldn't be anything. They are my tools, they are my purpose in many ways. Also, it doesn't matter how great your vision is if your team is running to the opposing direction. So that's why you need some solid tools to use in directing them, unless you want to be very reactive and you hate yourself. Because if you don't define the vision in a clear way, you will be all the time putting out fires. You'll be all the time reacting to what's happening around you. So let's look at some of the tools you can use to be more proactive. Let's talk about guidelines. For me, the guidelines are something that they're all the time, they're kind of progressing from descriptive to more specific in this way. You usually start from descriptions and mood boards and concepts. You work towards visual target shots or videos, and ultimately you make guidelines. In a perfect world, you establish something that is often called Art Bible. But you don't start from the Art Bible. Start from the descriptions, mood boards, concept, and the visual target, because those are the important part about discovering the style. What follows from the visual target and ends up being the guidelines is documenting and refining the style. And this is the most important part for me. It's the visual target shot, or a VTAR. It can look something like this, or it can look something like this, or it can look something like this, or it can look like something like this. This is an actual VTAR from a game, Angry Birds Evolution. It's actually funny how close to that visual target it ended up being. And with the visual targets, how I approach it is that I choose the screens that explain the main action and value to the user. That's where I usually start from. I choose the most important or an iconic screen. I identify the elements that need to make decisions on, and I keep refining those until I'm happy with them. And all the time while doing that, I try to keep the mission and vision clear in my head. And the easy way to test your visual target is that you show it to people and see if they understand what's happening in that shot. Is it understandable? Is it approachable? Is it aspirational? And then the test that I always want to do, because I'm always in the business of making better games than my competitor games. I always want to make games that are better than the currently existing market leader. So often I take the competing game that is the closest reference we have, and I put our game next to it. And I would love if most of the people I show that comparison would choose our game instead of the competitor. You can also do market testing and see if that actually happens. So start from the big picture, work on the details, go back to the big picture. Test your VTAR. And it's sometimes hard for me to get people understand why VTAR is so important. For me, VTAR is more than just a shot. It's a statement of what the game will look like when it's done. It's also a statement of what the game team is capable of. So if I've sometimes sit on the investor side, I always ask for the visual target. I need to see how the game looks like on the ambition level. I don't need to look it at on the game. I need to see it on a presentation, one beautiful visual target, because it's a statement of what the game team is capable of. And it's also a communication tool. It's for your team to agree that this is the game that we want to make. It's the communication tool towards potential investors. Is that a game that I want to invest in? It's a tool that aligns all the stakeholders behind that vision that you have set. It's a statement of vision, first and foremost. It's a statement of this is the game we are making. This is the game we are able to make. Because unfortunately, there's also this thing. Your game will never end up looking better than the VTAR. I've seen only a couple of exceptions throughout my whole career. I know it's sometimes possible, but it's usually not possible without changing the team. So often when you're making a VTAR, and by the way, how I approach it is that I have always the VTAR and then I have the prototype separately. I don't want to put all the art immediately into the game. I want to work on the VTAR separately. So there's a prototype and then there's a VTAR. The VTAR is the statement of ambition. Almost never it has happened that the VTAR or the game would end up look better than the VTAR. So, just to sum it up, everything is storytelling. Reality is messy, Simple is easier to remember. Art direction is about decision making, vision, focus on your mission and constraints that stand in your way. And when you're making visual target, remember that the art style is not one decision. VTAR is a great tool for discovering your style and even better tool for communicating it. With all of that in your mind, when you're now kind of going forward with your game projects, this is what I would really like you to think about. What is your vision? What is your goal? Why are you making the game you're making? Who are you making it for? Why should anyone pick your game instead of something else? What is the story of your game? What are the constraints? What are the biggest constraints preventing you from achieving your goal? And how to remove those constraints? Like, what kind of creative decisions you and your team could make to turn those constraints into competitive edge? And furthermore, if answering any of those decisions is too hard, you can always break it down to smaller questions. If something is taunting, something is too hard of a question on its own, you can always break it to smaller questions. Thank you. If you want to contact me, I'm in the Discord channel, but you can also contact me in LinkedIn. And now we could maybe open the floor for any questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand or ask them in chat. But if yes, great, please go ahead, Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria. Um, do you recommend doing these questions separately for your company and the company image, and also the game or games that we are trying out?
Yes. Short answer, yes. In some cases, like if you think about like company image or company's image, like it needs to be relating to the goal of the company. What is the goal of the company? How will it differ from other companies? And then when you're thinking about the game, it's depending on who are your competitors, what is the platform you're targeting. The constraints will be totally different. With all of those, and also when you think about it for yourself, what is your goal? Very important question to ask every now and then from yourself as well. So in everything, personally, I like these kind of things that are universal, and this is one of those universal things from my perspective. With anything you ever do, you should always ask the question why first. And once you understand the why, then you can formulate answers and move towards uh, being successful in that goal.
I also wanted to ask that we're just starting out. We're figuring out what we want to do. At what point should we rebrand? Maybe redo the company logo or something? Is it at the point that we've chosen our genre and the game is ready for soft launch? Is that the right time to
Personally,
do that?
yeah, great question. Personally, I would say that your company brand or your company logos or anything about the company doesn't really matter until you're trying to get funding, for example. So often, like whatever you currently have is most likely more than fine. Uh, it starts to matter more once you want to impress investor, or if you try to apply for investments, then you can think about more about the branding of the company.
Thank you.
I would do it that way. Thank you. There's a question from Taisto in the chat. How would you go about approaching trying to come up with the branding, or in this case, more of a recognizable art style? Any actual steps or brainstorming exercises we could take for coming up with ideas? Here, very good question, by the way. I have very demotivating and controversial opinion about that. Personally, I think it's, even though that I also mentioned branding in a couple of many places, branding I think is important, but for example, unique art style is overrated. Let that sink in. If you think about free to play mobile in particular, differentiation is overrated. It's often better for your company or your game to look like your competitor's game than differ from your competitor's game. This is partially to do with how the app stores work and how the market works, and it's because there is no decision making process where, like, in the 1990s or even early 2000s, you still had most of the games being bought from a game store. You had products in the shelves of the store, and you were choosing between the games, or you had game reviews in Pelitlehti or Mikrobitti, and you're choosing the game that looks best. Nowadays, that happens very rarely. Only in very limited cases. Sometimes, in case of, for example, um, sometimes in the case of Steam, for example, you might be selecting from the featured games, but often most of the buying decisions are made from the user acquisition. So you are seeing an advertisement for a game, and you're choosing whether that playing that game is more interesting than whatever you're currently doing. So, for example, in many cases, games are competing, especially on the mobile side. Games are competing against things like TikTok or Facebook Reels or YouTube. So it's about whether you're more interested in doing something else than what you're currently doing. So, but to think of like a little bit more kind of practical way, I would take, like, once you have an idea of how the game mechanics look like, what is the camera angle and all of that, I would take a screenshot of that view in Unity, and I would start working on top of that in a very kind of practical way. And then I try to identify those different elements that are important from the user's point of view. Like, is there a main character? How is the main character recognizable from the background? So these very kind of practical, simple things. And doing those decisions one by one, going through every element and like asking myself, is this best possible solution for this thing? So it's solving it one by one. But then the kind of whole thing about differentiating from your competitors, that's a strategic decision more than anything else. Oh, really great question in the chat about concrete examples of games with good discoverability. and the decisions the designers have made to achieve that. For me, the easiest answer to that would be probably Royal Match. I don't think there's anything particularly special about that game. The game's art style is not particularly exciting. The quality of the art is just so consistent. It's very consistent throughout everything. It also has a very recognizable character, the king character. The king character is not aspirational character, but it's more of a character that you want to help. Most of their user acquisition is about putting that king into different kind of hard places, like burning buildings or collapsing buildings, or in a tube with a snake. And then the advertising of the game is about helping the king. And while all those advertisements are kind of fake advertisements, there is not most of those are not representative of what is in the game, but they are uh, amplifying the messaging, which is help the king. So then when you get to the game, you're helping the king. So it's very kind of consistent experience from the first ad you see about the game to the playing of the game. So hey, maybe one or two questions if anybody has still, and then I'm hoping to answer even more in the one-on-ones and other sessions. And also feel free to reach out to me in Discord or LinkedIn. Hey, thank you for the session. I hope it was helpful, and I hope some of those things made some sense. Have a great rest of the evening, everybody. Thank you.